What is up, everybody? Welcome to another Saturday morning edition of the College Football Show here on RotoGrinders. Happy to be with you for another week of college football action. Basically, we've pretty much hit smack dab the heart of the college football season. Conference play in full swing. Fun 12-game slate on DraftKings today. We'll touch on FanDuel at the end of the show as well. And we'll keep you up to date on all the breaking news here over the next 45 minutes to an hour. I am Justin Van Zuiden, STL Cardinals 84. Got John Loab back with me this morning after a week off last week to catch his UConn Huskies with an early kick. John, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Great to be back with you. And we already got some breaking news this morning, so I've been busy all morning.
Yeah, it's been a relatively quiet year from an injury standpoint. Late breaking news. I mean, we've had some here or there. Feels like we're going to have a wild week at some point, and we did get news just about a half an hour ago that Travion Henderson is out for Ohio State today. Not that he was going to be mega chalk today by any means, but it's going to create some value in that Ohio State backfield. Mayan Williams and Chip Trayanum are going to get most of the touches there for the Buckeyes today. We'll talk about them when we get to the running back section. So that's clearly the biggest news of the day. Trevor Etienne for Florida has been downgraded to doubtful, so it sounds like he's not going to be able to go for the Gators today. So the two kind of biggest issues that we are waiting on throughout the course of the week have come down kind of with updates either late yesterday or this morning. Sounds like Bean is going to start at quarterback as well for Kansas. Daniels is a game time decision. He was a late scratch, of course, last week in a kind of a move that burned a lot of people. So that's something to keep an eye on as well. But that game does not start until, let's see what time that game does not start until 4 o'clock Eastern. So you're not going to probably have that news with a lot of time to swap. So just keep an eye on that. But John, anything else you're keeping an eye on as far as injuries that we may or may not know about? Just things to keep an eye on as we get closer to lock here.
The only other one, I'm sure we'll talk about him later, is Tez Walker. Is he starting? Is there a projected snap count? We haven't got clarity on that. The North Carolina wide receiver, he's very interesting today. But there's no big, I do think Bean, reading some of the Kansas, chat boards. I follow some of those around chat rooms and stuff like that. Is that the right word? What do they call those things? But it looks like Bean is going to start today. So if I had at this point, I'd say there's a 70% chance Bean is going to start at quarterback.
Yeah, we're dating ourselves by whether or not you still call them chat rooms or message forums or whatever you want to call them. But it does sound like Bean is going to get the start today, whether or not Daniels is active at all, or he serves as the backup, as the emergency quarterback. That kind of remains to be seen. So we'll have to keep an eye out for that news before the later games get rolling. But otherwise, seems like a fairly straightforward day from a news perspective. So we'll go ahead and break it down here. And as usual, we'll start at the quarterback position. Drake May is your most expensive quarterback on DraftKings today. He is $9,500. Jaden Daniels at $9K. Got other top-end quarterbacks with decent projections today, like Jordan Travis and Cameron Ward. What are your thoughts on the top layer of quarterbacks that we have this afternoon?
My preferred starter in cash games is clearly Jaden Daniels. You could make an argument if LSU was undefeated that Daniels would be higher in the Heisman rankings. It's just they lost that game, and I think people believe LSU's kind of out of it right now. But you look at his numbers, they're insane, especially from a fantasy standpoint. Now, in GPP, Justin, I think you almost have to pivot off of Jaden Daniels. We have the highest ownership right now. It looks like we have him at 28% at RotoGrinders. But Drake May and Cameron Ward, they could easily put up the same type of numbers as Jaden Daniels. I do like May with Walker back. But Cameron Ward is the sneaky one here. He's really going under the radar. I actually was shocked. I don't know about you, but they're the underdogs. They're undefeated, the Cougars, on the road against UCLA. And Ward has had a spectacular season for Washington State. So if you want to pivot, I love Ward a lot right there. And there's a lot of nice options to stack. Your only question is, who do you come back necessarily with UCLA?
Yeah, I think Ward is really, really interesting here today. Doesn't get a lot of national attention, right? Because he's playing for the Washington State team out on the West Coast. Pac-12 only has 2 teams left in the conference after this year, what have you. But this guy's put up spectacular numbers through the first 4 games of the season. 1,390 passing yards, 13 touchdowns, 3 rushing touchdowns, no interceptions. Just fantastic quarterback there for Washington State. Lost their top wideout a couple weeks ago, Lincoln Victor. He's going to be out again today, so maybe that concentrates the pass catching tree a little bit there as well. But I think Cameron Ward, in terms of my exposure in GPPs compared to where the field's going to be, he's definitely a guy I want to make sure I get a lot of exposure to today. Totally agree that Daniels is the cash game play. And, we'll talk about the wide receivers, which is probably the biggest misprice on DraftKings when we get there on the slate today. But safe to say that Daniels is going to be the popular play here. That game should shoot out big point total in that game. And then most people will maybe be looking a little further down the board for their second quarterback choice for their super flex option here today. And that's going to make the next range of quarterbacks, say the Baby Tua, Ewers, Milroe, Kyle McCord, Klubnik. I mean, those guys maybe aren't going to be quite as popular today. We do have a decent amount of ownership on Klubnik, which I don't really know if I love. I mean, they're favored by 3 scores. He's 8K. It's not like you're getting him at a discount there. Like this next range, I'm not super excited about until we get like under 8,000, but anything you're looking at here in this kind of upper tier below the top 4 or 5.
It's interesting you mentioned Klubnik because I was kind of shocked when I was looking at the roster percentage. We have him at 14.1%. And then I looked at Klubnik in more detail, and his ceiling is rather capped. His highest all year is 29. He's kind of consistent between 28 and 18 points, but I don't think he could put up 40 points, which really kind of limits him, in my opinion. If he had come down at a lower value, like maybe 65, 7,000, I would have considered him. But at this 8,000 range, I don't like it. The player that I'm only interested in, there would be one quarterback in this range. I do think it could be sneaky with Quinn Ewers. The Red River Shootout obviously getting a lot of national attention, but twice Ewers has gone over 30 points. He had 31 against Alabama, and last week against Kansas, he had 35. So there is a very nice ceiling there for Ewers. If you believe, I think wasn't it 49-0 last year? Texas just clobbered Oklahoma in this game. Now, I don't know. I don't think they're going to be 49-0 again. But I do think this game with Ewers, and what do we have him at percentage? I saw very low, I think, about less than 2%. I mean, if you really want to differentiate, I think there's potential, and there's a lot of stacking potential there for Ewers. So I'm very interested in him in GPP also.
Yeah, solid option there at relatively low ownership for your tournament builds. This range I won't have a ton of just because, I just like the next range a little bit more as we get down into the 7K. Sounds like Plumlee's going to be active for UCF today. Brady Cook on the other side of that potential shootout with Missouri and LSU is going to be a popular option. I am always a sucker for the dual threat ability of Garrett Schrader against that North Carolina defense. So those 3 guys I really, really like. They come a little bit cheaper. Bean, if he starts for Kansas as well, is going to get some love. So out of that group, say Plumlee, Cook, Schrader, Bean, good mid-range options in here. Do you have a favorite of that bunch?
My favorite is clearly Brady Cook. I mean, we saw last week what Jackson Dart has done against LSU. I basically watched every LSU game, and I'm just going to be kind. Their defense is not very good on the back end. So we know that Daniels and those receivers are going to put points up on the board. Well, what does that do? That forces Brady Cook and the Tigers offense to also match them. So even if LSU jumped out early, Cook is good enough to continue to play catch up, and he's going to challenge us at LSU, I believe. And Cook has been one of the surprise quarterbacks of the year. I mean, the last 3 games, Justin, 35, 26, 31 points. Ironically, he hasn't run as much. What's very interesting about Cook this year, he's a better thrower of the football. Now that we'll tell you why he was a better thrower as we continue in the show today. But he's completing a higher percentage of his passes. He's passing for more yards. And the running is actually down, but he's still there. And I do agree with you, Schrader. I mean, what is our percentage on Schrader? I think it's 25%. So
yeah, he's up there. There's lots of suckers like me out there.
Yeah, people know that he's so good around the goal line. And especially you mentioned it, the North Carolina defense. I think over the last 2 weeks, they've been really bad. They kind of started the year good, but Carolina's gone back to their last year's kind of ranking.
Yeah, which last year it was Swiss cheese defense for sure there for North Carolina. So I like that play a lot. Today I'll have plenty of exposure to Schrader in my tournament builds. And again, he can always get you that 100 rushing yard upside as well. So if we're going into the cheap seats for quarterbacks today, there's a few options. I never play Graham Mertz, but Florida is projected for 35 points today. If you want to jump on that train, you can. Dante Moore at 6K. And then Hudson Card is one of the cheapest on the board, but they're facing Iowa today. I think Kyron Drones is my favorite. Seems to have taken a firm grip on that number 1 job for Virginia Tech. I know they've got a low team total, but he's $5,400. Really makes the rest of your lineup work. And on a points per dollar basis, if I just sort the quarterback by points per dollar projection here, he is the number 1 guy on the list, which is obviously easier for a value guy to get there than a high-end guy because of the, obviously the nature of an algebra problem like that. But you've got Drones, you've got Moore, you've got Mertz. Any favorite punt quarterback options for you?
If you're going to put together a lineup with really high-priced receivers, or maybe you want to go to the top of the board for running back, I like Kyron Drones a lot. What is it? Is it 14.5 points projected, did you say? That does scare me, but what is interesting about Drones is he has such rushing upside. In the last 3 games, 74, 75, and 41 yards rushing, 4 rushing touchdowns. He had 3 passing touchdowns last week against Pittsburgh. Obviously, I don't expect a 36-point outing, on the road to FSU. But you said it. If we're going for price per value, if we get 19 to 22 points from Drones, which is reasonable to expect, I like them if you're looking to save down at one of the quarterback positions and you want to build your lineup around those high-end wide receivers.
Yeah, and that does kind of make that work, which is what kind of drew me to that a little bit. So don't mind him as a punt today if you need to go there. Any other quarterbacks that we haven't mentioned that you want to touch on here?
No, I guess some people are mentioning Dante Moore, the freshman at UCLA. I just am too concerned about him. Now, it might shoot out. We were talking about Cameron Ward. I'm not willing to put him in my lineups, but he is 6,000, and we have about 5% ownership. But I'm just not willing to go there. I'm not sure what to make out of this Bruins offense yet. I watched them twice, and it's kind of spread out, and Dante Moore's still so young. I think there's a growing curve.
Yeah, I do have him in a couple of lineups where I have quite a bit of exposure to Washington State. Just because it obviously works well in that kind of game stack build if you think there's going to be some back and forth in that game, but certainly not a core option that you need to play by any means. So have him sprinkled in some tournament builds myself, but not a ton. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the running back position. I think you're going to see a lot of people go mid-range here today. Not that the top end, I mean, there's basically a tier of one at the top of Braylon Allen at 8,400, and then a whole bunch of guys jumbled together. Like we can talk about Allen by himself, I suppose. Wisconsin projected for about 4 touchdowns. Ches Malusi did get hurt. But not like they're going to increase Allen's role beyond what it was before. I mean, do you need to prioritize Braylon Allen, I guess, at $1,500 more than any other running back on the board, I guess is my question.
I tried to put together a lineup with Braylon Allen in it. At the 8,400 price their salary, it is very hard to put together a lineup with the big-time wide receivers. I am not prioritizing him, but I see that we have less than 10% projected ownership, so I think there might be some GPP value there. Now, they have a freshman running back who they like at Wisconsin. I don't think we've seen him much. He's been limited in his carries, and I was reading about him the other day, so we're probably going to see him a little bit on the field. I just don't know. Phil Longo doesn't usually he's the offense coordinator for the Badgers. He doesn't feed his running back like 30 touches a game like the old Wisconsin style. So I wonder if he can really get 30, 35 points at that price tag. You're going to have to get 3 touchdowns. So I am not prioritizing Allen in this matchup today.
Again, I think he's fine. I like him in some GPP builds, but totally agree that he's probably not going to fit your cash build today. That's where you're going to start in kind of this mess of 6K running backs. Jonathan Brooks, Will Shipley, Devin Neal, RJ Harvey, all projecting pretty well today. They're all in the 6Ks. How do you kind of sort out? I guess that's going to be a common question. Rank the Harvey, Neal, Shipley, Brooks kind of tier there. What's your stance on that group of 4 here today?
My favorite one is probably going to be Neal. I know I'm hoping, well, what do we have for projected ownership on Neal here? Because we have him at 28, so people like him too. He had a down week last week against Texas, but the game script went away from him. But if you've looked at the UCF Knights against the run, let me just get here. Central Florida is giving up over 150 yards per game on the ground. Neal is a massive home run hitter. You know, if you've watched enough Jayhawks football, he can hit that 50-yard touchdown sprint at any time. So I love Neal, number 1. I do like to shoot it back with RJ Harvey. Now, I'm going to look a little deeper if Plumlee's definitely going to play, because Plumlee could steal some carries. You know, he's really good around the goal line. You had mentioned it. You know, we're all suckers for those dual threat quarterbacks. Coming back off injury, is Plumlee going to really be as active around the goal line as he has been in the past? So there's an interesting dynamic there. Then I go Shipley, and I'm a Shipley guy, but the problem is I just worry about this Clemson offense. I just have watched a lot of them Garrett Riley, the offense coordinator, they haven't reached the heights that I expected. And I think part of it's the offensive line's not very good. So then I would put Shipley 3rd. And who was the 4th one? I'm sorry. I know you mentioned a 4th running back there.
Devin Neal.
Oh, no. Oh, Neal was 1st, and then Harvey, then Shipley.
Oh, and Jonathan Brooks then is the 4th one.
Oh, I do like Brooks. The problem is the salary's a little bit higher at 6.7. So the way I work my lineups, I have no problem with Brooks, especially in the Red River rivalry where he's been so good this year. But sometimes with the salary, it was a little tight to get Brooks in. So I have a heavier rostership on the other 3.
All right. Yeah, I like Brooks a good bit. I like Neal a good bit. I'm not as much of a Shipley guy, so I'm probably a little bit lower on him as I've shrunk my window there. There we go. And then, you know, I'm any of these guys, I think you can mix and match for sure. Harvey, I've got in some stacks of that game where I've got maybe Bean, maybe a little bit overall good exposure to UCF. And even there, I mean, I think maybe you only need to play one of those guys, because then you get to, once again, another tier. We've got Montrell Johnson, who's likely to carry the load for Florida today. Again, they're projected for 35 points. ETN is doubtful. You've got LaQuint Allen, who remains very affordable for Syracuse in a game that's got a high total today. Do you have a preference between Johnson and Allen between the two today?
Well, I have we'll talk about Allen later. I do love him very much. He's my preferred option. But now that we got news that ETN is out, I am very interested in Johnson. He played for the coach, and why can't I remember the Florida coach's name, when they were at Louisiana. So he's got experience, and he's been splitting time basically with ETN. But you see against, it's the I don't even know, McAnee State maybe. He scored almost 27 DraftKings points, and against Tennessee, Johnson scored 17. I expect him to have over 20 today in this matchup. I mean, against Vanderbilt at home, I would think they're just going to run the football. So I do like Johnson a lot, but Allen is my preferred player today.
Yeah, both guys certainly fine. I'll have I've got, I think, looking now fairly equal exposure to both. So, nothing that's gonna make or break my day one way or the other. I like both guys a good bit. Because there's not a whole lot around here. I guess Carson Steele for UCLA. Like you mentioned, you weren't on the UCLA passing game all that much. Any interest in Carson Steele there or no?
No, there's some interest. I have a very low ownership. I think I had him at like 5% because we saw him last year at Ball State. He could go off. I don't think he's really hit a massive ceiling. Let me see what his high game is this year. 19 points early in the year. And I just wonder about his pass catching. I don't know if he can get the 4 or 5. If the game script goes away from UCLA, and I do expect the Cougars to put up points today, then how many touches is Steele going to get? As long as the Bruins, and I think that's why I don't have a high exposure, as long as the Bruins stay in the game, I think Steele will be good. But I'm very worried about Washington's. Even though the Vegas is telling us no, I still think the Cougars could run away with this game.
All right. And then as we scroll down, there's really not a whole lot else that's projecting mega well, other than we have to touch on the Ohio State situation. And if I just go with those guys now. So obviously Travion Henderson ruled out. We've got Mayan Williams is 6K, Trip Trainum is 4,200. We've got them projected basically both around 14 fantasy points right now, which obviously the guy that's 1,800 cheaper is going to be the one that gets the ownership. What do we do with the Buckeyes backfield here today?
If I'm going to play one, and as soon as I got the news, I started looking at it. And if you've been following Ohio State as often as I have this year, there is so much love on the coaching staff for Trip Trainium. They really like him. And if you look at the way touches have been going and playing time, Trainium has been above Mayan Williams. Mayan Williams, I expected a little bit more carries when we were looking at the summer, looking at the line, at the rosters. He has not done it yet this year. And Trainium got the game-winning carry against Notre Dame 2 weeks ago. So I hear a lot about Trainium. If I'm going to put one of these running backs in my roster, I'm going to go Trainium. Also, the salary matters, and it's a significant salary savings. If I'm going to go one, I'm going to go Chip Trainium today based on what I've read from Buckeye fans and have looked around.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a pretty clear-cut decision, especially when you factor in the discount. That $4,200 salary has plenty of value at the running back position where there isn't a whole lot of punts there today. The only other guy that kind of caught my mind around that same price tag, we do have Webb for the Gators with a decent projection, given that they should win comfortably today, and ETN is probably out. I've sprinkled him into maybe like 1 or 2 GPP lineups, but that's about the extent of my interest there. Anybody else that we haven't mentioned at the running back position that you think we need to touch on here?
There's one player who was very interesting, and when I built the GPP lineup, I wanted to go, I obviously went a different direction with Ward at quarterback. The running back, if you want some of this LSU game, and I definitely want some of the LSU game, and we always balance so-called chalk with ownership. But Logan Diggs, you can get a real nice piece of this LSU offense. And then you're kind of, shifting away from what everyone else is doing in the passing game. And in my cash games, I'm going cash. But if you want to go GPP, we have Diggs at less than 10% ownership. And he has been very good. I don't know if, been watching LSU in the last 2 weeks on DraftKings. He scored 29 and 11. So he only had 11 against Arkansas, but last week he had 29 against Mississippi. Earlier in the year against Grambling, he had 23. Diggs has become more and more interesting as you watch this LSU offense. And with Jalen Daniels and defenses have to worry about that passing game so much sometimes, Justin, you watch it, and there's just no one in the running lanes. It's like, oh, wow, Diggs is just running. What it was similar to, remember Clyde Edwards-Helaire, when you would have just such open running lanes with Joe Burrow and those receivers. Diggs is coming close. So I think Diggs is a very nice pivot. I don't have him in cash, but I do like him in GPP.
All right, so let's go ahead and move to wide receivers now. Let me clear my filters here, and we'll move on to pass catchers. And we talk about, the high end of pass catchers today. Obviously, the Ohio State guys are always highly priced, and that's fine. But you look at what LSU has done from a passing game perspective, and then there's, 8 guys priced ahead of Malik Neighbors. There's another 5 or 6 guys priced ahead of Brian Thomas. Luther Burden has gone nuts for Missouri this year, 4 straight 100-yard games. And if I just sort by ownership, maybe. Sometimes that doesn't work. I might have to refresh, but there it goes. So if I sort by ownership, Neighbors, Burden, Thomas, 3 of the 4 highest owned wide receivers on the board. They're all in the 6Ks. I mean, they really shouldn't be that cheap. So obviously from a GPP perspective, if you don't want to play all the chalky guys, you can have that conversation of who you want to fade. But like Neighbors, Burden, Thomas, you play all these guys in cash. Do you play 2 of these guys in cash? What do we do with these LSU wide receivers that are just too cheap?
So I mentioned it earlier, Justin, when we were talking about running backs. I think my first decision was, do I want both LSU receivers, or am I going to go one LSU receiver? I mean, I think you've got to have one of them in your lineup. Now, I have in many of my cash builds today, I have both. Because if you look at the numbers that they're putting, I kind of look at them as this, I need 50 points out of the 2 of them. If I can get 50 points out of both players, so if one goes off for 40 and the other only gets 22, I'm okay with that. So my decision was in a high number of my wide receivers, I'm going with both Thomas and Neighbors, obviously stacking them with Daniels. So if you don't want to do that, and I haven't done it at all, then the question is Burden with who? And right now I'm going to try to save a little bit of salary. I'm going Burden and Thomas because I think I really, having watched all of these LSU games, I don't think you can distinguish. I might think Neighbors is a little bit better of a player, but when you look at the numbers and the fantasy points, I don't really think there's any difference between the 2 of them. So I'll take Thomas this week with Burden. That would be like, to me, if you're looking to get those 2 in.
Yeah, I don't have a problem if you decide you want to go Thomas over Neighbors and save the $400. I mean, Neighbors is going to have real high ownership. And you could see either one of those guys certainly having a big day today. Everybody else that's priced above 6,000 is going to be like unowned because of all that chalk. Marvin Harrison at 1 or 2%. We've got Xavier Worthy at 3%. Johnny Wilson does have a decent ownership projection. Keon Coleman. I mean, who would you have a favorite GPP pivot outside of that game, outside of that LSU game, of the guys to spend up for at wide receiver?
My favorite is Emeka Egbuka. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. left the game with an injury 2 weeks ago. Now he is in the lineup today, but there has been some rumblings about how healthy is MHJ. Egbuka is in a great spot here to smash. They have a projected total of 38.5 points. Maryland is not very good defensively, so I think there's a huge opportunity here. Now without Travian Henderson, who knows where the running, we do like Chip Rainey, but we don't know for sure where the running game is going to go. I like Ibuka very much. At less than 3% ownership with a wide receiver who could get over 30 points. And if I wanted one other, I'm very interested in Keon Coleman. We saw him the opening week against LSU when he really went off. And I do think that this game against Virginia Tech, they're projected at 37.5. Right now, Coleman is less than 3% ownership. So in a GPP, I've actually made lineups with Ibuka and Coleman, and then I choose between the three with the high ownership that we discussed later, if you just want to make sure you get those points.
Yeah, I like that call. I like Ibuka. I think all these, I like Coleman. All these guys really make for interesting pivots away from the popular plays in this range. And then as we kind of move down, again, Washington State going to be without Lincoln Victor again today. So their wide receivers are going to pop in kind of the mid-range. Josh Kelly, Kyle Williams, Hernandez all the way down at 3,900 is a guy that's going to look good in projections. Theo Wees, if you want a cheaper guy from that Missouri offense today at 5,500, I think is really interesting. The UCF pass catchers, Kobe Hudson, Javon Baker, get a bump with Plumlee back today. What are your thoughts on kind of this 5K group of receivers?
My favorite one are the two young men from Washington State, Josh Kelly and Kyle Williams. They both went off. I think it was 2 weeks ago, right? Washington State, I believe, had last week off, so they didn't play. Lincoln Victor, you mentioned it. He's expected out today. And from what I've read and looked around, he's not going to be in the game. So you have Kelly and you have Williams. I love those stacks, those wide receivers, the stack. I think Kelly went for over 40 points. Let me just look. Last time he played, he was so good. I think he had 3 touchdowns. Yep, 44.9 points, 3 touchdowns against an impressive Oregon State game. If you watch the Beavers, they're very good on the back end. So I was shocked. I did not expect them to score that many points. Kyle Williams in the same game had 33 points. So, I mean, Justin, you mentioned it about Ward. I think if you really want to pivot away from LSU, who appears to be by far the highest owned stack, right? Yeah. I think I could get 90% of the production out of the Washington State Cougars and really compete and save a little bit of salary. I have no problem stacking both Washington State receivers with Ward today. I like it very much. Now, if you really want a strange, like low ownership, Will Shepherd at Vanderbilt. I mean, kind of in the CFF community, I don't know if you've heard this. We call him Mr. September because he's so good against lower level competition, both last year and this year. But he is by far their best player on the Vanderbilt offense. Expect Florida to win today. So game script says in the second half that they should be throwing the ball. Shepherd is very low ownership. Now, you'd have to be banking on that he turns it around. But last week against Mizzou, he had 21 DraftKings points essentially, and he's gone over 20 points in 2 other games. So I do like Will Shepherd as a very interesting pivot here.
Yeah, don't hate that. You're certainly banking on some volume there, which is fine. I mean, if they're trailing by 3 scores in the second half, maybe he gets some easy looks and is able to get some garbage time production. It's definitely not the craziest idea today by any means. He is at 5,700 there on DraftKings. Let's see, as we start moving down to the 5K-ish, right at 5K. Let's talk about UNC. So we hinted about this at the beginning of the show. Devontae Walker was ineligible at the beginning of the year. They said he was ready to go. Coaching staff was pretty upset. Now he is going to play today. We don't really know how much or what his role is going to be. He's first on the depth chart. He's the stone minimum 3K. Nobody else is going to play the other North Carolina receivers today. Do you have a lean on how this situation plays out?
Well, the 3,000 opportunity at wide receiver, and I've actually put him in my cash games at the flex position because it opens up so much more value for your other three receivers, and there's so many good ones in this lineup today. Now, I was watching earlier today, I think it was about 9 in the morning, I was watching ESPN. They even did not know if Walker was going to start the game. They did say on ESPN there's no question that Walker's going to play in the game. Now, ESPN did not know if he'd play 10 or 30 snaps. So there is a large questions about what the volume will be. But at 3K, what are we looking at, Justin? A touchdown, 3 receptions, 40 yards, and we get 3 times salary on that. I do think Walker, he's 6'3", over 200 pounds. He's from Kent State. What I like about him most is that he is playing with Drake May. And Drake May is arguably, the second quarterback in this draft class. And Drake May's been good, but he hasn't been incredible like Caleb Williams or Jalen Daniels this year. Walker could be the difference maker. Now in GPP, I would pivot away from Devontae Walker. I know you're going to get the salary there, but there are other wide receivers. Nate McCallum, Kobe Paysour, Brian Nesbitt. If I had to take one, I like Nate McCallum, especially in the GPP, because we're always looking for ceiling. Against Minnesota in week 3, Nate McCallum had 40 DraftKings points. Why do I like him? He's the slot receiver. Him and Paysour. I expect that Walker, he's going to be your classic outside X or Y receiver. Maybe McCallum, he's the guy in the middle. I think if you're looking for a decent floor, you go Paysour. But McCallum, to me, is the ceiling guy in this offense with Walker on the team, in the lineup, on the field, I should say.
All right, let me undo that filter. If I sort the other wide receivers kind of by point per dollar projection, we try to uncover maybe a few other values in here. Carlos Hernandez, I mentioned earlier, at 3,900 for Washington State. Donovan Brown for Syracuse. If you want, you don't have to stack anybody with Schrader, but he's fine. I mean, it does get pretty thin down here. Antonio Williams, the Clemson pass catcher, is just a little up in the air of how that rotation is going to shake out today, and they're huge favorites. I don't mind Xavier Worthy. We didn't really touch on him at 6,300, but I think he's fine in tournaments as well. There anybody else at receiver here that we haven't mentioned?
No, I'm glad that you mentioned this Xavier Weaver, because I just think that Oklahoma-Texas game is interesting, and we haven't really talked about. Now, part of the challenge with Oklahoma, they basically have a 4 or 5 man rotation now at wide receiver. So it's very difficult to get volume in the Oklahoma receiving core. But if you're looking for options where you're looking at high end, like where might I be able to differentiate from this field? I think Oklahoma gives you some options. We had mentioned a couple of weeks ago, Andrell Anthony. He was a very nice player in our cash game lineups. Last week against Iowa State, he only scored 2.5 points, so Anthony might be someone. One of the players who I find very interesting this year, freshman Nick Anderson. He's in this game now. He doesn't get volume, but man, he has scored 5 touchdowns in the last 3 weeks for the Sooners. He's very fascinating if you're looking for an option in this. I think it's going to shoot out with Texas, and we haven't mentioned it, and I don't think there's very high ownership. I think you can go, if you want to take a risk, and I know what we're talking about is strength versus strength. In cash games, I don't have Oklahoma because the matchup against the Texas defense is difficult. But if you're really looking for an interesting shootout, an interesting quarterback, we never mentioned Dylan Gabriel. I have one lineup where I got Oklahoma coming back with Xavier Worthy in GPP because I can't rule Oklahoma out from throwing the football all over the field.
Yeah, it's just Gabriel is expensive, and so people lean towards obviously getting Daniels there if they're in that salary range, which leaves all the other quarterbacks kind of in that tier, under-owned compared to where they otherwise would be. All right, that takes us through the DraftKings slate here today. We'll touch on FanDuel for a bit. I'll check for questions before we get out of here.
We got two questions only really to touch on.
Sure.
One was Butthole Jenkins wants to know what's going on with Tyler Brown.
Yeah, so Tyler Brown, go ahead, John, your thoughts on kind of that situation there today.
I like Tyler Brown. I think he's 5,300. If my memory serves, let me see. 5,300, I was I believe after this morning, Antonio Williams, I'm sorry, was highly questionable play for the Clemson Tigers. Tyler Brown is a freshman, and it was very surprising because anyone who's followed Dabo Sweeney at Clemson, he's very reluctant to play freshmen. And Tyler Brown stepped onto the field last week against Syracuse and scored 28.4 points, 8 receptions, 151 yards. I have him in a few cash game lineups. I guess if you really, you mentioned Schrader earlier, right? Putting him in your GPP. I'm not against coming back with Tyler Brown or having Tyler Brown in that game because maybe Clemson's passing game gets on track a little bit against Syracuse. So I like them there.
They're playing Clemson's playing Wake though.
Oh, Wake Forest. I'm sorry. My fault.
Don't run it back with anybody from Wake.
I don't, unless you want to go back to wide receiver. No, I'm probably not going anyone on Wake in their offense. But yeah, I like Tyler Brown. I guess you can stand alone with him.
And then the other question was maybe after you hit on FanDuel cards, would you be able to give some of your favorite DFS pick'em plays over on Prize Picks?
All right. I did pick a few over on Scores and Odds this morning as well. So, yeah, we'll touch on those at the end. But, John, time for us to give a little recap here of DraftKings. And we always recap with your Fantastic Four plays of the week. So what do you got?
All right, if you want to go to the RotoGrinders optimizer and you want to do a cash game lineup, I love using our optimizer. At quarterback, I've mentioned it, I'm plugging in Jalen Daniels, not in GPP, but in all my cash game lineups. He's just too good, ceiling's too high, love the shootout. We hinted around it. I love LaQuint Allen, running back from Syracuse. He's their 3-down back, he's their pass catcher, he's their goal line. Of course, Schrader can steal some carries around the goal line, so maybe he doesn't have 40-point upside, but his floor is so high. Plug in LaQuint Allen at running back. I love Luther Burden. I think you got to have Luther Burden in your cash game lineups. I mean, Justin, he's been unbelievable. We were talking about Brady Cook earlier. Luther Burden, if you've been watching, he's been playing in the slot this year. Dinkowitz, the coach, moved him over to the slot, and they love Missouri peppers the slot position. I just don't see how LSU can stop Burden today, and especially in a shootout. So I love Burden. And then I'm going to put Walker in. We mentioned him just a couple minutes ago, but if you go Daniels, Allen, Burden, and Walker, that's my Fantastic Four. Plug them into the cash game, into our optimizer, and you get the 20 lineups around those 4 players, and you have yourself a real nice build in cash games.
All right, let's go ahead and move over to FanDuel here, where again you've got some of the same guys that we've talked about, the higher end plays. But if you look, Jaden Daniels on FanDuel is $900 more than he is any other quarterback on the FanDuel slate. If you look at wide receivers, Malik Neighbors is the most expensive wide receiver. Brian Thomas is the second most expensive wide receiver. So you don't have that pricing disparity like we do on DraftKings, which is probably going to make your FanDuel lineups look just a little bit different. And again, I'm going to highlight the games here that are on the FanDuel slate that aren't on the DraftKings slate. And then we'll go from there. I did see somebody mention in the chat a little bit earlier in the Discord chat. Again, you can catch that at rotogrinders.com/Discord or follow it from the homepage in the CFB channel. We'll keep you up to date throughout the day. any injuries and alerts that might come across. So valuable tool to have if you're playing and keeping an eye on the news throughout the day. That the Ohio State running backs, Mine Williams and Trainum, are the same price on FanDuel. There's not an $1,800 discount. I think Trainum is still the play that I would take, but it's certainly a little bit closer there on FanDuel where their salaries are the same. But I've highlighted some of the later games, and this basically overreaches with the DraftKings night slate as well. Some of the players that are on the FanDuel main slate, I've sorted by ownership. So we've got guys like Raheem Sanders still at 6,200 on FanDuel, projecting very well over there. You've got Taj Brooks, Baron Morton, Quinshon Judkins. I mean, some of the guys that we've gotten used to playing in some of these slates are going to have some value on the all-day slate over on FanDuel. So, John, I'll give you the floor. Who are some of your favorite FanDuel plays today?
So quarterback, it's almost impossible to get the LSU stack. I guess you could, but you're really going stars and scrubs on the FanDuel. So I actually pivoted. I think Jordan Travis of Florida State is a fascinating pivot on FanDuel because I think Ward, let's see, is Ward on this one? Wait a second. Is Ward,
yeah, I don't think they are. I don't think Washington State's on this slate.
So even that's why I highlighted Jordan Travis, because you come down, he's almost 2K less than Jaden Daniels. Now, I have in my Fantastic Four on FanDuel is Jordan Travis at quarterback. I also think it's interesting Jackson Dart. If you want to go away from Jaden Daniels and if you don't want Quinshon Judkins, I like Jackson Dart a lot on this slate. And I was going down. I don't think even Drones is more expensive. Look at the difference in price. Drones is $9K on FanDuel as opposed to DraftKings. The other player that I'm interested in at quarterback would be KJ Jefferson. I think he's an interesting quarterback on this slate. And at running back, I like Jonathan Brooks a little bit more because I'm looking for touchdown upside. And I do think Jonathan Brooks will get in the end zone, twice in this game. I like him. You mentioned Taj Brooks. I like him very much too. My number one receiver, I don't know if anyone's been watching this, but I like that Colorado game against Arizona State. Arizona State's gone to their third quarterback. The young man who's playing now played a lot. I think his name's Trevor Bradgett. Trevor, why can't I remember his name? I'm sorry about that, everyone. But he played last year, and he's a better thrower of the football. So I have Elijah Badger. He's only 6,800, and we know how bad Colorado is on the back end. So I like Elijah Badger a ton at wide receiver.
Yeah, I think Badger's a really interesting tournament play today. Let me sort by ownership. Let's see where we've got. I think he's down.
Not bad.
There he is. He's about 7%. So
that's nice.
I like Bradley for Texas Tech as well. You can pair him up with Baron Morton, who's pretty cheap. Kobe Hudson's pretty cheap on FanDuel at 6,600. Obviously, the Colorado receivers, Horn and Weaver, have some value over there. Egbuka's a little cheaper on FanDuel as well. If I pivot to the running backs, you got Brooks and Judkins will be really popular. Don't know if I'm as high on Jawar Jordan today. He struggled last week, and they have to face Notre Dame, so I'm kind of out, I think, on Louisville for the most part, though.
I agree with you.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm out too.
They're still undefeated somehow, but that probably ends today for Louisville. So anybody else at running back here on FanDuel, or really anything you think we've missed?
I do like Raheem Sanders. Oh, if you don't like Elijah Badger, we haven't talked about this player in any of so far all year, I don't think. Cam Scattybo, the running back for the Sun Devils. He's been very good. We have him projected at almost 22 points this week with less than 1% ownership. He's a little pricey, 8.6, but man, Colorado is such a sieve defensively. I like Scattybo a lot. He's an interesting with that low ownership. That's a very interesting pivot at the running back position.
Yeah, because he's kind of, he's hemmed in here with Shipley and Brooks and Harvey kind of all around him in price. That that project really well. And, people that are playing the all day or the earlier slate on DraftKings are going to, they're playing Harvey and Shipley over there. And sometimes these later games on the FanDuel slate end up getting overlooked a little bit. So, all right. I think that's good for a FanDuel discussion here. I have kept tabs on the Discord chat. Haven't seen anything else come through there. I've answered a few questions in there. TJ, has anything else come through the YouTube chat that you've seen? I had too many tabs open and was slowing down, so I had to close a few things. But
no, just quick touch on prize picks if possible.
Yeah.
And then Butthole Jenkins, when he was asking about Tyler Brown, he was concerned that the game log on DK showed him missing a bunch of games.
Who's that?
Oh.
What player was that?
Tyler Brown.
Let me look him up while you do prize picks.
Yeah, so, I think that was mainly because of the Antonio Williams situation. We just didn't – his playing time was kind of up and down. Somebody in the Discord chat did ask about Omarion Miller for Colorado, who, again, with let me sort our Colorado projections here. So, you've got Weaver and Horn are obviously going to be the top two. Miller is coming off a breakout game. He's fantastic last week. I think he's really, really interesting as a deep GPP flyer. I wish he was maybe $600 or $800 cheaper, but I think he's really, really interesting in tournaments. So I definitely keep him in my tournament pool over on FanDuel today. All right, so now I've got to catch my prop picks that I put in this morning. So put in 3 prop picks for the Oklahoma State Kansas State game last night and got all 3 of them right. So we'll see if we can get that today. So a couple of the ones that I put in on prize picks today, more than 130 passing yards for Gavin Wimsatt for Rutgers. Rutgers is not great, and he is not great, but his passing prop is 130 yards in a game where they are 3 touchdown underdogs. And he's gone more than 130 yards in 4 of their 5 games so far. And some of them were, easy cupcake wins to where they didn't have to throw in the second half. 130 yards, if he doesn't get there, either they lose, 50-0, which is possible, or he gets injured. 130 passing yards for Gavin Wimsatt for Rutgers. I think that's an easy one today. Then I also went less than 43 rushing yards for Deshaun Fenwick for Oregon State. He did get a few games where he had some more carries because Damian Martinez had a couple of fumbles. But last week, Fenwick had like 6 carries for 1 yard. He's still clearly the number 2 in that backfield in conference play. They're going to lean on Martinez as long as he doesn't fumble again. So less than 43 rushing yards for Fenwick. Those are a couple of the props that I am on Prize Picks today. John, anything else that you've come up with there that we need to pass along?
No, I'm excited. I think the Colorado game, we mentioned Arizona State. I think that's a very sneaky game on FanDuel that just isn't getting spoken a lot about because it's not on the DraftKings main slate. I like Omarion Miller. I think he's very good. We had him very low ownership, so I like him too.
All right. So with that will do it for today. We'll duck out of here so we can finish our lineups and let you guys finish yours as well. Thanks for hopping on and joining us today. If you like the show, please hit the thumbs up button. Subscribe to the RotoGrinders YouTube channel. We appreciate that very much. We will catch you back here next Saturday, same time, same place. Thanks to TJ for producing and helping out behind the scenes for us today and keeping tabs on the questions. Thanks to John for joining me. I am Justin. And good luck on this Saturday. Have a great weekend, everybody. We'll see you later.